Now we've come to the part of the bag where we're going to tackle the handles. So whether you're using decorative webbing or polypro covered in fabric, this is the right spot for you. So by now you should have decided whether you're going to be using decorative webbing or covering polypro handles. So I pulled out this webbing that I sell in my shop. It's from Ruby Star, of course, because I'm obsessed apparently. And this is their 1-inch wide starry in black. And I've just kind of mocked up the bag. I just folded the quilted panel in half and put the contrast bottom along the bottom. And I think it looks really nice. And if I was just making this just for me, I might use this. But since I want to show you all of the steps that are involved, I'm actually going to be covering covering handles with fabric, and it'll look more like this. You know, it'll be narrower because I'm using polypro that is 1 inch wide. So I've cut my polypro. Oh, so that being said, if you're using decorative webbing, you can just skip ahead to the next chapter in this video. Where we'll be actually dealing with this webbing. But if you're like me and you're going to be covering polypro with fabric, you're in the right spot. So step 1 is I cut these to the right size according to the chart in step 5 of the, is it step 5? I'm trying to look at my pattern. Yes, step 5, prepare handle covers. So I've cut my polypro to the right size. Whoa! And I've got my handle covers as well. So in order to make a tube that I can feed this polypro into, I'm going to take my handle covers and I'm going to fold them together right sides together. So a lot of this time we've been doing it wrong sides together, but I'm going to fold them together right sides together, and I'm going to stitch 1/4 inch away from this raw edge all the way down the entire thing so that I'm creating a tube. And I'm going to go sew that up and I'll be back. So I'm going to take both handles, fold them in half, wrong sides together, make a long skinny tube, so 1/4 inch away from this raw cut edge, and then I'll have a tube. And then I'm going to show you how we can actually use our magic tube turner and turn those inside out. It's super fun. My handle covers have been sewn together into long skinny strips with a 1/4 inch seam along one side. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but I promise that's there. And now what we need to do is press the seam that we just sewed open. But there's a bit of a trick here in that you don't want to just jam your iron down on this tube, because what I don't want to do is flatten this and create harsh creases on either side of this tube, because I'm about to turn it inside out. And if there's creases going one direction, when I flip it inside out, it's going to be hard to press that tube so that the seams are great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just open it up, take my iron, and just kind of hover my iron over top of it so my iron is not touching the wool mat on my table. And the result of doing that is that, I'll show you a close-up here, is that you end up with kind of a tube that's still somewhat open, and the seam is slightly pressed open, which is good enough, but you haven't put a harsh crease in this tube overall. So again, I'm just working my way down. I'm using lots of steam because the steam is doing some of the work for me. And I'm just trying to center this seam in the middle of this tube without putting my iron all the way down on the table. And it's not it's not going to be the end of the world if you do put some harsh creases into this. It's just going to make the next step a little bit harder. That's all. Okay, so I've already done the other tube, so I've got 2 tubes that are ready, but they're inside out, because what I'm going to do is put my webbing inside of this, but they're inside out. And this is where the magic of a tube turner comes into play. So I've got, I sell these tube turners, and it says 1/2 inch for 1 inch and larger fabric tubes. And this is a 1 inch fabric tube, so it works just fine for this and larger ones. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the plastic tube, so it comes with 2 parts. It's a purple plastic tube that is hollow, and a wooden dowel that's got a pointy end, kind of like a chopstick. So I'm going to put the plastic tube inside my fabric tube, and I'm going to leave an extra, 3 inches? So I've got an extra 3 inches on the side. So the tube starts about here and goes down. I'm holding the tube in my left hand. I'm going to simply fold the fabric over and then shove it in. And then this is where I normally just kind of jam this pointy end into my stomach and then feed the fabric. I'm going to see if I can do it in front of this camera a little bit better. Feed the fabric onto the tube. Now it works way better when it's jammed into my stomach. And I'm just going to work the tube all the way down, pulling the fabric, pulling the fabric. Okay, I gotta jam it in my stomach, sorry. Pulling the fabric, pulling the fabric, pulling the fabric. And eventually you'll see the end pop out. So the end is popped out. I'm going to grab that and then pull the plastic tube, and it has magically just turned my tube inside out. I've got this one little end, I just need to poke it up. And there's my wooden dowel from the inside. So now my tube has been turned. I'm gonna do it one more time with the other tube. Plastic bit goes inside the fabric tube, leave a tail of about 3 inches, I don't know, sure. Use the blunt end to shove this, because if you use the pointy end, there's a chance you could hurt the fabric. I'm just going to start pushing that in there, jam it in my stomach, the pointy end in my stomach, and just kind of feed the fabric onto this tube. And just keep working it down, working it down, working it down until the end pops out. And when the end pops out, then I can grab that end where I can see the right side of the fabric and just start pulling, pulling, pulling until the tube is out. And then with this last end, I'm just going to poke it out using my chopstick, or my wooden dowel. I'll be honest, I don't know if that's how you're supposed to use a tube turner, but that is how I do use a tube turner, and that is how it works very well for me. So now I've got my tubes turned the right side, but now I actually do want to press them. So they're kind of wrinkly and kind of a mess. So I'm gonna just give them a quick press. You, I'm sure, cannot see this on screen, but trust me when I say that the seam is centered along the width, and I'm just gonna give that a quick press, trying my best to keep that seam centered. It's no big deal if it wiggles off a little bit. And I find that the polypro will in fact slide into a tube better if it's pressed, believe it or not. I've tried it because I was like, maybe I can skip this step, you know? Maybe I don't actually have to press at this point in time. But I find I just get better results. And because we pressed that seam open during the last step, it's laying nice and flat inside this tube. So if I was to open this up, you would see that that center seam is laying nice and flat. So I'm just gonna do one, and I'll show you. I've got my polypro webbing that I cut to the right length, and I've got a large safety pin that I have simply fed through the end. So I find if I do it twice, that's better. And I tend to go through the webbing twice, and I go on an angle. Instead of just going one time straight up, I just feed my safety pin through the webbing like that. Then I'm gonna seal up the safety pin. And the benefit of this being on an angle is that I can kind of fold that tip underneath. And I'm going to take this and start feeding it into the fabric tube that I just sewed and that I just pressed. So folding it on a kind of diagonal helps. You got to get it started. Once you get it started, then you can simply push a little extra fabric along, and it should slide over the webbing, or the fabric should slide over the polypro webbing. So I'm feeding the safety pin along a few inches at a time, and then I'm pulling the fabric and working it down. And it does take a little bit of time, but it's not, I mean, it doesn't take forever. And it's so satisfying when you can get that webbing to slide through there. I'm trying not to put too much pressure on this safety pin because they can actually pull through the webbing. So once I feed a little bit through, I'm going to pull at the start of the webbing just until that kind of reaches it. Then I'm going to grab the webbing and pull the rest of the fabric. So I'm not putting any extra pressure on that safety pin that I don't need to, because it's pretty sad if you get to this point and then all of a sudden your safety pin rips out of the webbing and then you have nothing left to like feed the webbing through. It's really tough when that happens. So I don't want that to happen to you. So my recommendation is just to pull the bare minimum that you can, and then grab onto the webbing. And you'll see it's going, like it's going. I'm almost at the end, but not quite there. So the fabric tube should be about the same length as your webbing. Do not fret if it's not the exact same length. It's no big deal. We're gonna cut this down in a second. to make it the exact right length. I just pull it until I can kind of see the tip of the webbing. Then I undo my safety pin, work that fabric down. And it's okay if my webbing is longer or shorter than my tube. Like I said, that's totally fine. In this instance, my webbing is a little bit longer than my tube. I just didn't measure quite exactly right. So now I like to take a second and press this again because it's pretty hard to tell with this black fabric. Choices, Shelly. But if this was a lighter fabric, you'd be able to see any wrinkles. And you don't have to worry about ironing over top of this polypro webbing. Yes, it's made out of plastic. No, it does not melt. So I've just given that a nice crisp press. And then the next thing I'm going to do is take this to my sewing machine and sew 1/8 of an inch away from each long edge. So I'm going to sew all the way down one side and then all the way down the other side. 1/8 of an inch away from each side. And what that's going to do is just secure the polypro webbing inside to the fabric outside. So let me go sew. First of all, I guess I've got to finish up this second one. And I'm going to take that to the sewing machine and I'm going to use thread that matches both sides of this. So in my top thread, in my needle, I'm going to have black thread, and in the bobbin thread, I'm also going to have black in the bobbin because I want those stitches to look nice. And I mean, I guess if you wanted to use hot pink or like neon yellow thread, then go for it. But my recommendation would be getting thread that matches your webbing. So let me go do that and I'll be right back. I promise these are sewn. It is 100% invisible, but there is stitching there. They are attached. So now that I've got my 2 handle covers sewn, turned right side out, and with the webbing inside and stitched down, I'm ready to move on to the next step. Now we've come to step 6 in the pattern, which is to prepare the handles. So whether you're using decorative webbing or you have covered your polypro, these are now called the handles and we'll be moving forward. The very first step is to trim these down. So I have trimmed mine to the lengths that were required or laid out in the pattern. When you're making the mini, there is a choice that you have to make in terms of how long you want those handles to be. So I've called them either short or fancy lady style. So the short ones are indeed quite short. They just barely reach across, and they're, oh, Claire's here again. And they're just sort of long enough to grab onto. Hi, Claire Bear, can you scoot? Thanks. She really likes this bag for some reason. I don't know why she always wants to go in it. Are you gonna go in this one? Okay, and then these ones I would call, they're longer, and I would call these fancy lady style, and that is because you can put them over your elbow. Yeah, she really likes that bag for some reason. You can put this bag over your elbow and carry it fancy lady style. Other people have told me, hey, that's not fancy, that's just practical because my hands hurt if I hang onto handles. So when you're making the mini, you have to choose whether you want short handles or fancy lady style handles, but the rest of them just have one size to cut them. So in case you're at the pattern and you're like, what is a fancy lady? I don't understand. There you go, that's the answer. Okay, next, you've got your handles trimmed, and now there's another decision that you have to make about them. You have to decide whether you want to leave them intact, so they're wide like this, or, pardon me, Claire, if they're sewn in half, and I would call this more comfortable to hold in your hand. So it's kind of like, pardon me, Claire. I would say that this is maybe more comfortable to grip in your hand, and I typically sew them in half when I'm making the mini size, or if I'm making the medium size, I will often sew them in half this way. And although this one, I just wanted to try it and see, I like this one too, where it is not sewn in half. And then usually on the large ones, I leave the handles as is, so I do not bother sewing them in half. But I mean, do whatever suits you. The good thing about it is that this is totally changeable. So if you sew them in half and later on you're like, ooh, I don't really like that, you could literally just take a seam ripper and just undo this one little seam, and then your handles would be more like this. They would be intact. Or if you made them like this and later on you're like, ooh, I wish I would have sewn them in half, you can literally just take this bag and fold them in half and sew them, and then you'll be all sorted out. So whatever decision you make here, it's not permanent. You can just make a choice and then adjust it later on if you want. But because I want to show you all of the, I'm just going to put her on the floor. Bye, Claire. Because I want to show you all of the parts of this pattern, I am going to be sewing these handles in half. So I'm going to follow the pattern, and it tells you to mark the handles from each end, a certain length. So you're going to mark that, and then you're simply going to fold the handle in half wrong side together. And what that means in this case is just folding it so that you can't see that seam anymore. Hey, goodness, she's in there like scraping up the bag, ripping it at it with her claws. I don't know why she likes these bags. I have found her in there 3 times today already. She took a full-on nap in one of the big bags. I don't know how she did that. But I'm basically going to clip this together, and then I'm going to sew between the marks. So I'm going to go do that. You don't need to watch me do that, but I'm just going to clip this together. I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and then follow the line of stitches that I already made on here and just sew between those marks. Okay? Simple enough, right? Again, you'd probably want to pick a thread that matches this binding or this fabric on both sides, in both your bobbin and your top thread. Unless you're really going for contrast, in which case, do that, man. Do whatever floats your boat. Okay, let me go sew these. Now you can see that I have stitched my handles together in this middle section, and they're nice and skinny there. They're gonna feel really nice in my hands, and I've left the remaining bits stitched together, unfolded in half. And then the very last step in this step is to mark these handles. Once again, you're just gonna have to believe me, but I promise that I have made 2 horizontal lines on each and every one of these handles. And what this, just in case you're wondering, like, what are these marks for, Shelly? They're gonna indicate where, when you attach it to the bag, where you're gonna sew in a little boxed X. So that's what those little lines represent. That's where there's gonna be a boxed X when you actually go sew this onto the quilted panel, which we'll be doing shortly. That gives you the guidelines for where to stitch it. Okay, so now we've completed this little section, which was all about handles, and I'm going to see you in the next video where we're going to be tackling the next section where we're attaching the quilted bottom, we're attaching the handles, and then it's really going to start to look like something.